because I feel that there is such an exhaustion like with dating,
Yeah.
and the fact that like 9 times out of 10 it seems that like most connections end in something that feels like undernourishing or like
Hello, and welcome back to Robert Meets World. In today's episode, this is a conversation between myself and Isha Tutty Jackson, a relational and intimacy based guide. It takes place in the jungle, so please pardon any potential audio disturbances, including some minor cicada sounds that you might hear. Hopefully, it adds a bit to the atmosphere. While I have your attention here, if you could please leave a review for this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcast content, it would really help to increase the visibility of this program so that I can continue to bring on guests. All right, without further ado, let's get into it.
So I want to go into the work you do
Mhm.
with individuals
Yeah.
because you've mentioned that you do a lot of this mirroring.
Mhm.
And there's something I read, for example, like I think it's our mirror neuron system,
Mm.
the gateway to our empathy,
Mm.
because we learn through we learn through mirroring other
Yeah.
people. And it necessarily, in order to change our patterns, for example, we have to have the right mirrors, the right frames.
Yes.
And therapeutic relationships, for example, I think one of the things I read is like a therapist is really the first secure attachment that you have
Mhm.
in attachment theory perspective.
Mhm.
So when you say
Mhm.
you work with
Yeah.
individuals,
Yeah.
I think you said you work with both men and women, but
Yeah.
a lot of men, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
you take on these different archetypes or
Mhm.
forms.
Mhm.
So can you
Mhm.
speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess first it's just important to say that like there's different, again, when you have a relationship with a therapist, usually you might be seeing them like once a week and it's like a 1 hour session or whatever, like, and they're very contained in terms of the formats, you could say, or the structure. It's like very much this is the session and we're in the session and we're out of the session, and there's the integration time. So the way I hold space is really much, it's really opening a field. Again, it's opening, like you kind of said, a full like relational field in order for there to be more depth of like transformation and alchemy essentially. So what that kind of looks like is, yes, we have the kind of one-to-one sessions, like primarily online, but then I would also do one-to-one in person, like immersions and retreats with people. And then I also have like this kind of ongoing like WhatsApp/Boxer support, which I encourage everyone I work with to use as much as possible, because that's actually where I feel the integration happens, is like, because it's not just in the session, right? And this is something I think that is something that's very a little bit skewed at the moment in the kind of general transformation slash spiritual space, because we have these ayahuasca ceremonies or we have like these deep powerful like retreat experiences, but then what happens afterwards, like you can have these powerful experiences, but how are you actually integrating them into your day-to-day life? And like, do you have anyone supporting you with that? Is there accountability? Because normally, like most of us just revert to our old ways
Hmm.
quite quickly when we return to our normal lives. So how I work is that I really feel like opening this like deeper space and field where your daily lives are is brought into the container. And for example, say we were doing some work around boundaries, or like it could be desires, whatever it is. um if you're now going into the dating world and you're like dating someone, like I would want to like be having that conversation, like how's it going, like did you actually get to explore this boundary setting, or like how did it, like bring the day-to-day experiences that we're having into the space to see how things are integrating and to feel it. And I suppose more than that, it's also like, I think a big issue most of us have, like myself included, I will say, like it's not like I've fully like, evolved through all of this stuff. Like I'm still working on a lot of this stuff myself. But actually reaching out for support when we're in the middle of something, when things aren't clear, when things feel confusing, when they feel messy, when you feel vulnerable and raw, that itself alone, just reaching out and having someone you begin to feel safe reaching out to, can completely transform how you relate to your own like emotional states. And actually it can then, again, what I really believe is that like by creating at least one, like you said, secure attachment, or one field of consciousness that is safe, and that is like allowing that kind of rewiring of like any previous relationships that didn't feel safe, or that you didn't feel like you're able to speak your truth in, or whatever the kind of wound is. it really like paves the way then for every relationship in your life to become more secure.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially it allows you to become more discerning, and that's what I like to mirror to people, is like how to actually have crystal clear discernment about who is coming into their field and what, at least if you're going to make that choice to, like, go with the avoidant person that is going to trigger you, you can do it maybe from a more conscious place. Essentially, we always have choice, and we can still choose to go down these pathways, but can we at least bring the awareness to the choice we're making?
I feel kind of stuck on this problem I notice
Mm.
where, for one, it feels like should we have figured this stuff out already?
Yeah,
Number one,
totally.
and number two,
Yeah.
like I think about like ancient myths or something,
Mm,
where if you were in ancient China or something, and you
mm,
had the dojo, and then you would have this grounded figure who would be the instructor, like the
mhm,
sensei would be the right
mhm,
word,
mhm.
right? And I feel like those types of relationships would be the like auxiliary type of situations where you would lean
Mm,
on people in that
yeah,
way. What's happened in modern
mm.
day that we've lost those things?
Yeah, I love
Have we?
this.
Or
No, I love this question. I mean, essentially, I think like the power dynamics and pedestaling has been a massive issue, right? Like where we hand our power over to the guru, the doctor, even the therapist, right?
mm,
Like I don't. That's not empowering. You know what I mean? When we kind of like, okay, my therapist said this, or my doctor said this, or the guru said this, essentially, like that is like disempowering us. It's cutting us off from our own power. So the way I work and the way I feel like we need to be working in this world is to really empower ourselves and empower each other to listen and know our own truth, like to kind of be able to discern like what is actually true for me. And so that's like going back to the kind of, I suppose, what you said about the mirroring. Like essentially, like I feel like I'm a very attuned person and I can read a lot in people's fields, but I'm not going to get it right all the time. And I always say that to people. I'm like, I'm going to say things to you, and you're not going to necessarily agree with everything, but even in the not agreeing, that's allowing you to get more discerning about what actually feels right and wrong for you. And that's really important that you share that with me, and that we also get comfortable with like saying, oh, that doesn't actually resonate for me. And even that is giving people permission. So I don't know if I answered that fully, but
I think.
the sense, I feel like that what you said about the sensei type of
Mhm.
character, they are essentially mirroring you back to yourself.
Mm,
That is what they're doing. They're empowering you. They are constantly like giving you tasks and sort of like let's just say things to kind of like initiations,
yeah.
essentially initiations, which are really redirecting you always back to your own power.
Mhm.
And I think that is what we need more of, is people who are doing that. And there is a lot of people doing that now, but it's definitely not always been the case. And I think there's a shift happening now where people are realizing that that's actually the only way we can kind of move forward,
Mhm.
is by empowering ourselves and empowering each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think relationships feel so different from, let's say, work? You can go to work and there can be all this rhetoric around
Mhm.
learning and making
Mhm.
mistakes, but when
Mhm.
it comes to relationships, it feels like it's almost a critique of our own self-worth if we show up in a way that's
Mm.
poor, or in a way that just doesn't have the practice, let's say. Um,
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I'm just learn to how to answer that. I mean, it's interesting because I'm gonna answer this maybe in a roundabout way. I feel like I would say nearly 50% of people I meet these days, both men and women, tell me that they're celibate.
mm,
And I mean, it's fascinating to me, because I'm like, wow, like more and more people are choosing celibacy, um, at least in the shorter, because I feel that there is such an exhaustion, like with dating,
yeah.
and the fact that like 9 times out of 10, it seems that like most connections end in something that feels like undernourishing, or like it is depleted. It's like draining, it's exhausting, it's like disappointing. And it's something that is really sad. Like, and like, how has it gotten there? Why has it gotten there? I mean, I think there's just been an awful lot of like false narratives about what relationships should be and shouldn't be,
Mm,
and idealism, and kind of like focus on the external rather than the internal.
Mm.
You know, it's like when people say like, what kind of relating style do you want to have? I mean, of course, these days, open relationships and polyamory are much more common. But even there's this kind of debate: is monogamy better than polyamory? There's all this stuff going on within these fields. But for me, it's not about what it looks like on the outside; it's what it feels like on the inside. Like, how safe do I feel with my partner? How trusting do I feel? How trusted do I feel?
Mm.
And I mean, actually, if we were more focused on those inner feelings rather than this external, like it needs to look like this, it needs to, then I think we would be in a much more coherent and clear space, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, like, I feel like I always go back in time, and I'm like, so you mentioned this point, like, more people are single than ever before, for
Yeah.
example. And what was it about prior times that obviously people seemed capable of getting into relationships? Or maybe is the
Mhm.
truth that many folks got into relationships
Yeah.
that were not very nourishing,
Yeah.
and then maybe this newer
Yeah.
blooming of people is realizing those
I
things, or
I think that's true. Definitely, I don't know, like, yeah, I would say in recent like generations, definitely there has been. I think there was again due to maybe religion or the church or like just societal ideas and like
even
conditions.
socioeconomics too, right? Like
Yes, yeah,
the way
yeah,
in which gender roles have
yeah,
equalized in some
yes,
ways and things like that.
yeah. But I think there was and have been a lot of like unhappy relationships in the past and relationships where the power dynamics were very unhealthy
Yeah.
or like that there was, let's just say, I don't really like these terms so much toxic, but essentially let's just say the unhealthy habit, like sides of both the masculine and the feminine
Mhm.
playing out. And I mean, of course, we can't look at one without looking at the other. They're both completely intertwined, and I know there's a lot of focus now on feminine kind of empowerment, and I think that is very important, but
Mhm.
equally, like, they are so deeply connected, and I think this is something that people often overlook when it comes to trauma and when it comes to this kind of, because basically, like, if the feminine field is like in a certain frequency, then the masculine field is too. It's just, it looks differently on the outside, but essentially they're both mirroring each other.
Mm.
And that is, I think, the natural like law of reality, essentially, in these dual experiences we're having.
And what you're saying, I think, is that there is when there is challenges in the polarity or the way in
Yeah,
which folks are showing up, but then also there's this overload of like what things must look like. And I
yeah,
wonder if
yes,
part of like the um let's call it the sharing or attention economy, right?
yeah,
And the need to project in a particular way in which your life is going, for example,
hmm,
then creates all these, we can call them, conscious, subconscious, and unconscious expectations about what
yes,
things should look
yes,
like.
yes.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I do think, so what was going back to what you said a minute ago. I think people we're in a deep process of unlearning, especially those of us who are on a more spiritual or conscious path, which more and more people are on some level, at least attuning to. So there's a huge process of like, hang on, that didn't work for my parents. I grew up in a household where my parents weren't happy most of the time. Like 9 out of 10 households were not like happy households in the kind of sense of like what we really look for. Like it's. I would say there was like conflict. There was a lot of stuff that went under the surface, a lot of this kind of like manipulative kind of behavior, like dominating behavior, like the unhealthy side of it, right? So then that leads to, of course, patterns playing out in children and in young adults, and it continues. And again, the kind of narratives around sex and sexuality are like extremely like dark in many ways, and like so many, of course, young men and women probably too addicted to porn, and like there's so many layers, right? Like, so intimacy and sex and sexuality are like really at the core of like everything, in a sense. Like, it's like, if they really are, they literally are at the core of everything. We wouldn't be here, right, without it. And yet it's the most shadowy like part, I feel, of our human psyche and of our of like humanity, in a sense. So it's like, how do we actually unearth that and like work with this stuff in ways that actually alchemize it in healthy ways, like really, let's just say, not dismissing or trying to push down the different parts of our psyche, that or the different parts of our humanness, of our animal instincts or nature, but actually like bringing, like, allowing them to play out in healthy ways. And this is, again, I suppose, when you get into the deeper aspects of, like, say, conscious kink work. and sexuality, it can be really fascinating because, you can actually do a lot of healing when you're bringing consciousness to some of these kinks,
Mm.
and actually it can be very transformative and allow things to kind of like alchemize in ways then that aren't playing out in really nasty unconscious ways.
Mhm. I keep coming back to this
Yeah.
line that I heard one time, which was, I think it's from Krishnamurti, and it was like every relationship is a mirror, right? And it's like
Yes. Yes.
there's also the connecting the
Yes.
different mirrors
Yeah.
representing the locus of
Yeah.
patterns that you
Yeah.
are maybe have not
Yeah.
challenged yet
Yeah.
to some
Totally.
extent.
Totally.
And I wanted to kind of step a little bit more into your work, for
Mhm.
example, that you do with
Mhm.
men, right?
Mhm.
And so my pages here, my book.
Yes. Yes.
You mentioned that you do work with these kind of different wounds that
Yeah.
I suppose men that you work with have. And I kind of wrote down four of the core masculine wounds that I found here. The first one is the father wound.
Mhm.
Um, the second is a sort of emotional suppression,
Mm.
this feeling of you can't access the broad spectrum of
Mhm.
emotion. There's
Mhm.
like anger,
Yeah.
anger,
Yeah.
maybe anger again. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
Number three, isolation.
Yeah.
The feeling as though, this is the myth of the self-made man.
Mm.
Like I got to do it all on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Number four, the performance slash provisioner, right?
Mhm.
The feeling that I am only as
Yeah.
good as what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I can give and what I can provide. Yeah.
And number five was the mother wound,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
relationships, for example, the mother has a almost they do their emotional regulation through their children.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So if we take a step
Yeah.
into some of your work with
Yeah.
men here, what are you finding that you're observing in a lot of the young or
Yeah.
not so young men that you're working with?
Yeah. I mean, I particularly focus on holding like a feminine field for men to repattern their relationship with the feminine. So I haven't dived into, for example, the father wound so much,
Mhm.
but definitely the mother wound, which is huge. And I think like again, a lot of men that I meet have mother wounds of some sort.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean,
What you mean by the words, the mother
the
wound.
mother
Yeah.
wound. Yeah. I think definitely well, I've come across men who've had, like, abusive mothers on some level, so that's, like, the kinda darker side of it, where the mother has literally been sort of quite, like, dominating, abusive, manipulative in how she's she's been with her sons. But then on kind of, like, a lighter level or, like, a less kind of intense level, I guess there is this codependence, like you kinda mentioned, this kind of the mother who kind of, like, projects all of her ideals onto the son, and then wants the son to fulfill the role that the partner probably isn't fulfilling. So there's definitely that side too. Yeah, and then I mean there's many layers to it, but I mean I'm not sure if I've like dived so deeply into like more of the kind of
Yeah.
like pieces, but definitely I would say another core wound I come across a lot is just this feeling of subtle manipulation from the
Mm.
feminine, and that can be again that can play out in terms of this sense of like men not really trusting that women aren't just after their money, or
Right.
after their provision, like you said, but not in a healthy way, and that these kind of subtle kind of dynamics. There can also be this like feeling of competition that comes up a lot, feeling like that they're not really fully supported or that only supported in a sense of I support you because it supports me in a sense, if you know what I mean, like, rather than necessarily this full I mean, these are subtle things, like, a lot of the time, these can play out in very subtle ways, but
Mhm.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of these, like, subtly manipulative pieces and that I've when especially when I've gone deeper with some of the men I work with, it hasn't necessarily been there at the beginning, but
Mhm.
then, like, the deeper I've gone, the more I've, like, realized, "Oh, wow, there's actually, like you said, a lot of anger that has not been expressed." And often, yes, it can be connected to the mother wounds, but also, just multiple relationship dynamics where men have felt extracted from.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I feel like obviously it goes both ways with both
Yeah.
the feminine and the
Of course.
masculine.
Of course.
But a lot of the work you've done has been with men, so we'll stick
Yeah.
on that
Yeah.
topic. But I guess I worry sometimes that there's like this sense for keeping in topic with
Mm,
men. It's like, why am I the way that I am,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And that
mm,
could be related then back to some of these wounds that
mhm.
you are not conscious of.
Yeah.
And then part of, I
Yeah.
suppose, the
Yeah.
mirroring dynamic is
Yeah.
revealing those things.
Yeah, there's definitely there's the revealing, and then essentially, and the revealing kind of happens in a number of ways. Like
Yeah.
I can either like reflect things, but essentially, like a lot of the work I do is focused on bringing you into your body, you know.
Okay.
And again, for a lot of men, I think they can be more in their head, right? Like less connected to the body. The body is more feminine in a sense. And essentially, like both as men and women, we all want to be coming into union, you know. I mean, these words, sacred union, are thrown around a lot, right? We can look at it as the balancing of the masculine and the feminine polarities. That's the most kind of common way to look at it, especially with the tantric kind of backdrop. However, essentially, it's really just bringing all parts of yourself into cohesiveness again, you
Mhm.
know, and some of the more typically masculine qualities like clarity, focus, you know, direction, um, you know, all of these pieces, like, you know, which a lot of men are like very good at, you know. But then, for example, the more like letting themselves surrender, you know, like the state of surrender, or like being in sort of more chaos, you know, which, you know, there's a lot of different states of the feminine, just really like feeling like a sense of emotional feeling, letting yourself feel a range of emotions and softening, you know, like softening into a receptive state. Because I think a lot of men feel they have to hold everything together
Mhm.
and be this kind of like, you know, pillar for not just the women in their lives, but for like society in a sense. I feel like there's a real sense of like, I have to hold it all together. I have to be strong. I have to be the strong one. I can't, there's no room for me to actually rest and relax, you know? And even then in their, you know, primary relationship with a woman, often if especially at certain points in the life you're going to be going into fatherhood quite quickly, so you have to then hold it together, not just for, you know, you have not for yourself, for your woman, for your children, so there's not much space to rest, you know.
Mm.
So I think it's really important to create space then for for also that feeling of like actually surrender and resting, you know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does, and I empathize with that
Yeah.
feeling that I'm hearing, right? And I'm just imagining like that,
Yeah.
you're holding it together, right? And I imagine if folks who are listening to this might, really empathize with that when you
Yeah.
have all those different stresses and responsibilities that you do try to feel like you're holding everything together.
Yeah.
But then how do you deal with this then counter side where you have all this projection of what you need to be
Yeah.
as a man, for example, or as a woman, for
Mm,
example? I know
mm,
ultimately what you've mentioned
mm.
is going in and finding that empowerment inside to
Yeah.
maybe write your own
Yes.
story.
Yeah.
But yeah, take that free will.
Yeah. I guess again, it's like it's first of all kind of like let's just say identifying where we struggle to be authentic. You know, like where we don't feel like we've fully been felt heard or seen in the past, you know, or in our lives in general, and where we struggle to speak our truth. You know, so when you kind of start to identify those pieces, you start to go, okay, maybe there's an issue with saying no, you know,
Mm,
or like I'm someone who keeps saying yes, or I'm a bit of a people pleaser, for example, you know, or you know, for perhaps you're someone who just doesn't really, you're always going along with the flow, you know, you don't actually ever like really claim your desires. Or for example, I feel like a lot of like men I work with definitely struggle to maybe feel shame around their sexual desires, or around like certain desires they have. They maybe feel some sense of shame around it. So it's like it becomes repressed, right? And then it becomes like this undercurrent. I mean, this is the same with anything in life, right?
yeah.
Like men, women, everything. Like when we kind of have things that are coming into our consciousness, or are under the surface and are not being expressed within dynamics, and it can be, you know, between two people or just in an inner realm. Obviously, they're going to continue knocking at our door, and they're going to continue showing themselves until they're dealt with. You know, I feel like I went off a little bit on a tangent again.
Well, one way that I heard it put was
Yeah,
like, if you fail to if you fail to deal with the shadows, they get banished to the underworld,
yeah.
and then they manipulate you from Hades.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is it. The shadow work is so important. And that's like the power of like alchemy, right? Like bringing the shadow into the light and integrating it,
Hmm.
you know? So there's the book Existential Kink is a great book actually, which uses like kink in a sense to work with the shadows. And it's like, again, it's like something that I don't know, let me just feel into this for a moment. Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example to use, like
Could we use power dynamics, for example?
yes, actually, yes, yes, exactly, yeah. So yeah, for example, maybe you have a shadow of a dominant slash abusive partner in the past, or it could be a parent even in the past. And then actually, you kind of suppress that, because you don't want to go near anyone who's like dominant or abusive. But actually, a part of you wants to be dominated, right?
Mm,
And so if you don't bring that into the light and actually integrate that, then you're gonna either keep attracting dominant situations in your life, or you will probably become dominant yourself in ways that are unhealthy. Whereas if you can actually bring that into the light and maybe work with it, and again, like the conscious kink slash sexuality space can be really powerful for this, because you might be like, actually, I really need to submit, right? Like power dynamic of like submission. Um, and when you actually let yourself go into that space of like being consciously dominated,
mm,
right? Essentially, it can move a lot of energy for you, and it can actually support you in integrating like past experiences that have been traumatic, and actually you're claiming, no, like this now I get to do it in my way, I get to consciously choose. And it's like it's a really wild how these things happen, like, and I've had like personal experience with this from my own past, and it's like it's quite like crazy, like again, to the kind of to the average kind of mind, to think like, why would someone who's been through that experience want this kind of experience now, but actually it can be one of the most healing things to go consciously back into these realms and integrate it into the light.
Well, I read a while ago Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger. The book starts with this question: why do animals not get traumatized?
Mm.
If you're a deer living in the
Yeah.
jungle, you experience probably more
Yeah.
scary scenarios
Yeah, 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 yeah,
than
yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah.
And so he goes into this model where I think the idea was that it's a sort of activation
Yeah.
energy inside of you that's brought up, but then never really extinguished.
Mm.
That's that fight, flight,
Yes, yes,
freeze.
yes, yes.
And then it's frozen within the physiology,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
that every
Yeah.
time you're then re-encountering
Yeah.
this, you are trying to master it in a
Yeah.
way, I
Yeah.
think is what Levine says.
Yeah, no, I love that. This is great. This is great. Great. Thank you for bringing that in, because it's so important. Like you said, it gets stuck in the body, and it's not, our words only communicate a very small amount, actually. It's how our animal body communicates that actually people respond to.
Yeah.
So actually, again, another example I would have of this is like, for example, if you're trying to communicate something like, I'd really love you to do the dishes, like, say you're talking to your partner or someone in the house, and you're like, I really want you to do the dishes, or like, it's whatever it is. If you, a lot of the time we communicate these things in a way where we're actually like feeling apologetic, feeling afraid. So we're like, I'd really like if you could do the dishes. And like, naturally, people don't want to respond to that. Like, our
Mm.
bodies don't, they feel a bit repelled by that kind of, let's just say incoherent kind of, or murky energy, because
Indirect.
indirect. But it's like, it's not, again, it's not even the words that matter, it's how you say it. Because when you say it with like, it would feel so good for you to do the dishes tonight. Like, that's something you actually want to respond to. You want to go, actually, yeah, I'll do the dishes for you. Whereas if you're like, oh, like I'd love, I feel like I've done the dishes every single night this week. Can you do them tonight? Or whatever it is. I mean, it's not even the words that matter, but it's again the energy and the frequency you're bringing. And if you're bringing something that feels, again, incoherent, essentially, often because we've got these trauma responses that haven't been fully addressed in the body. Again, it's like the animal, like you said, talked about the animals, but I mean, animals naturally go and shake, right? They shake it off.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't often do that as humans. So that's something that,
It's
again, is so important. You need to learn. And this is why I think tantric practices are so amazing, because a lot of it is, again, embodied work, where we get to use the energy centers, we get to use our bodies in ways that really kind of like empower us and like direct us into, like, let's just say, like, how powerful it is when we actually kind of like bring the body and the kind of the spoken word and the voice. You mentioned the voice earlier, but I mean, you expressing through sound is so important, and it's not something we're used to doing. But even just like, again, like having breaks or times where you actually go and like scream and rage, or listen to a metal song and just like get all your anger out, like that is so powerful.
Mhm.
And I mean, again, if we can kind of start integrating those things into more of a regular part of our lives, then we're actually giving ourselves opportunities to release like a lot of the stress and trauma from our day-to-day experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step into more of those like somatic based practices, right? Because I feel as though relating
Yeah.
on that theme of relationships, like I was always struck, I can't remember who said this, but there's something to the effect that understanding itself is not simply intellectual,
No, definitely
right?
not.
There's a sort of embodied sense of understanding something.
Yeah.
And really we need that experience and
Yes.
practice.
Yes.
And that's a
Yes.
full three-dimensional experience,
Yes.
right? But then, as you mentioned, there's these sort of body-based practices which are
Yeah.
maybe we don't learn about them, or maybe they seem a little bit odd to kind of just shake your
Yeah.
hands and like,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
But they can actually be quite powerful,
Really
right?
powerful.
Especially when like intellectual talking modalities aren't working.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
for example, for me, like contrast therapy between hot and cold ice bath was
Mm.
a fascinating
Mm. Mhm.
experience in being able to feel discomfort,
Mm.
really see some resilience.
Yeah.
So, what kind of, I suppose, practices would you do with the people that you
Yeah.
work with?
Well, there's one practice which I always find really powerful, which is it's actually like a breath body sort of movement where you're like hip thrusting. So you're really
Mm,
connecting to your sacral center and your root center, which again is where the foundations of safety are built in our body, and also where like our sexuality and our creative life force comes from, or where it like stems from. And you can actually just do this like hip thrust where you're actually just connecting to a yes or a no. Right, that's one for
mm,
example. So you're going, yes, yes, and you feel the energy in these centers as you connect to this yes or no, and it can really support you in feeling the power behind a full embodied yes or no.
mm,
So that's like a very specific, let's say, tantric practice that you can do where, and you can do it. You don't even have to do it with a yes or no. You can just do it to feel the energy in it. You feel it. I mean, you'll feel the power of like because it kind of almost connects to, especially with the no. You can feel the power of anger,
mm.
you know? But
Or
again,
firmness, directness.
it's like, "No,
No.
no," and
Yeah.
again, you wanna direct that energy from those centers, but I mean, the natural movement of the body that you're doing just naturally brings you there. But then, for example, I also do a lot of work, inner child work, you could say, or just guiding people into like somatic awareness. So, for example, again, when we're talking about like connecting to like a full yes or a full no, or like how do we start to recognize that, I might guide someone in a sort of a meditation or visualization to connect to the last time they felt a full yes and how does that feel in the body, like what sensations are you connecting to? Are you noticing expansion? Are you noticing like a warmth, a coolness, whatever it is, and the same then with the no, which when I watch people as I'm guiding them through this, it's just fascinating because their whole bodies tend to go into like contraction. Like you can see the pain on the face as we go into the no,
Mhm.
and when you go to the yes, it's just like light, open, like, and you can then amplify that as well and say like, okay, for example, with the yes, like imagine like 10xing that yes. Like how does it feel to really feel that full yes? Like imagine winning the lotto, for example. I mean, see, instantly you even just smile, right? Like I win the lotto, like it's such a great feeling. So, by connecting to the somatic awareness and beginning to tune in to the inner kind of landscape,
Yeah.
we begin to kind of then recognize that more deeply in our day-to-day lives. So
Mhm.
so there's that kind of thing, and then I mean another like there's many examples I can give you, but another one that I think is also just very powerful because a lot of people have this fear of rejection is actually doing, for example, like a communication practice where you would ask me for things that you want and I'm just going to say no to you,
Mhm.
or and so you've but it's not just about doing it on a sort of a surface level. You have to really be like, for example, ask for something you really deeply want, and then you hear me saying no,
Mhm.
and you really let that land. Like, how does it actually feel to feel rejected? And actually, I mean, there's this amazing guy on Instagram. I think it's called 365 Days of Rejection, but he's been going around asking for like things, just random things, for like every single day for a long time now. And it's like it's rejection. You can kind of call it rejection therapy
Yeah.
because the more you get used to hearing the no, the more you don't feel afraid to ask anymore. And so again, if we're not comfortable in asking for what we want in life, then how can we get it?
Mhm.
So that's just another example of like how the more you do these things, the more you embody them, the more you kind of like you don't live in the fear anymore, and you get to actually kind of like really go for what you want in life.
Yeah. Well, I think there's definitely the practice, but then there's also being able to then integrate. You mentioned that other side, the integration where you're able to try to rewrite those narratives.
Yeah.
And I feel like those are things that you have to live out, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do all
Yeah.
the training, for Muay Thai
Yeah.
in the gym,
Yeah, yeah,
but you
yeah.
actually really only get good when you're sparring.
Well, totally, but I think the thing about it is yes, so you can practice them, let's say, in a sort of a, like, a safe space where a container, like, say, for example, I practice with my clients on a call or whatever.
Mhm.
But you're right, like, I mean, unless you're actually going into the dating field and, like, actually bringing up some of these frameworks, for example, like, I work with specific frameworks that help to consciously relate, especially when we're getting into intimacy, so that we can actually have the kind of connections that, like, do feel nourishing. And I
Mhm.
think this is something that I'm very passionate about is, like, how can we create, like, safety within a kind of a connection in order for it to be more likely to end up being a nourishing connection than whether it's a short connection, whether it's like just a connection where you talk or you hug or you end up, going deeper into intimacy. It doesn't really matter, but like really essentially, how do we foster like nourishment,
Mhm.
I think that's really important and something that we all need.
Can we take a step into
Yeah.
this topic of intimacy,
Hmm.
especially as it relates to communication and certain
Yeah.
things like that, and then also to the body, because it feels like it's a. I mean, there's so many layers. Again, I always go
I
back to
know.
this thing. It's like it feels like we should have figured this out by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But different layers of like communication, for
Yeah.
example. I suppose maybe we start with what
Yeah.
is a nourishing relationship? Is that
Yeah.
independent and unique for everybody?
I feel that I mean, nourishment is a feeling, right? Like, it's like if you eat a really good meal, you feel nourished. If you spend some time in nature, like swimming in the sea, you tend to feel nourished. And it's just a feeling of like satisfaction, of like fulfillment, of ease. It's not a feeling of like holding or tension. It's like something that you feel like, oh, I can relax, right? Oh, that feels so satisfying. That feels so good. So I guess, yeah, it's a good thing to define first and foremost, like what does nourishment feel like for you, right?
Yes,
Because it'll probably feel slightly different for
every
everyone.
person.
Um, and then I would say, a lot of the time in relationship dynamics, people get very caught up in this give and take energy.
Mm,
Like, I've given you this, therefore I expect this in return, kind of thing. But actually, I feel like that's very, let's just say, problematic because actually, whether you're giving or receiving, like, like, again, I don't even really like using those words because essentially, like, I can be, let's just say, massaging you,
mhm,
and it could be for me or it could be for you. Like, it could be something that I'm enjoying and it's like more for me, and it doesn't mean you won't enjoy it, but essentially, like, can I give you a massage? Like,
mm,
who's that for? It might seem like it's for the person you want to give the massage to, but a lot of the time it's actually not. A lot of the time the person who's asking you if they can give you a massage wants to massage your body because they want to massage your body.
mm,
And it's like it's a really important thing to kind of like, I think, again, get out of this kind of like idea of like, okay, X, just because this person's doing something to me, it means that they're giving me a gift. And actually a deeper layer of that then is like, how does it feel to receive from this person? How does it feel to be like given a massage by this person? Does it feel nourishing?
yeah.
Because you can actually leave massages and feel like really like depleted, like
Mm,
or taken advantage of. And equally, when you're giving a massage, is it something that actually feels nourishing to you?
mhm,
So I think rather than like focusing on this, like I've given this and it means this and da 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 because that's the norm and that's what we're used to. Like, how does it feel for you? How does this relationship feel? Do you feel, again, it goes back to what does it feel like on the inside? Does
yeah.
it feel safe? Do I feel safe in the presence of this other person? Do I feel like I can share my truth and they're not going to react or like get defensive? Do I feel like I can bring something that might feel a bit uncomfortable up in the conversation and they're open to receiving that or open to learning and growing and evolving with me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
You mentioned the give and take thing, and
Yeah.
it's I feel like that probably is because there's all kinds of
Mhm.
wounds around that as well, right? And I suppose maybe what you're pointing to is really it comes back to the individual and is like, is this something that I want to do? I might think it's because I'm trying to give this person something, but actually
Yeah.
it's like I think Alan Watts would say it's like,
Yeah.
some you give to charity actually because it's you're
It makes
selfish.
you feel
It makes
good.
you feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, and essentially, like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being selfish in a certain sense, right? Because we want to be filling ourselves up.
Mhm.
Like, we can't give like freely from an empty cup, really. Like, we're just going to drain ourselves. But if we're feeling nourished, we're feeling like whole, and we're feeling fulfilled, then we naturally want to give more in the world. We want to share more. We want to share our gifts. We want to share our medicine. We want to like offer it out. And I think that is a place that we all need to get to, because a lot of, I would say most people operating in the Western world are operating from like a stressed space, you know, and that they're not feeling so fulfilled, you know, so that there's a sort of a constant leaking of energy, or like, you know, a sense of like not feeling fully nourished, or getting so caught in this ideas of what we think our life should be like,
Mm,
that we're actually missing kind of the important information that's being given to us by our bodies on a daily basis, you know. Like essentially, like, I mean, I know for me, when I really started listening to my body and being like, okay, my throat is sore, it's time to stop talking, you know, or I'm starting to yawn, means that it's time to leave the party, you know. Like really our bodies are giving us so much information all the time, but we choose to ignore it a lot of the time, you
yeah.
know, and override it.
Yeah, I had a medical well, like healthcare person in healthcare that I talked to one time, and they had this framework about health. They said it was related to physical health, but the idea was like everybody starts at 100%, right? And what happens is you acquire damage over time. You know, you hit your
Mm,
knee against the wall, you sprain your ankle a little bit. But the problem is from 100% to 50%, you feel no pain.
mm,
You're acquiring all these things. You can feel
yeah.
uncomfortables or difficulties, but you feel no pain.
Mhm,
And then once you get to the pain
mhm.
threshold, it's 50%. And that's when you start trying to do things.
Yeah,
Maybe some of the things that you do bring you to like 60%,
yeah,
but then either you stop doing them or you forget about them because the pain's gone. Like the
yeah,
obvious symptom is gone. But all throughout this journey, you're getting information as you're going through them. You
yes.
know, my knee is hurting a little bit,
Yes.
or I feel
Yes,
tired.
yes, 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 yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So like how do we avoid going down to the 50, 40, 30%
Yeah.
mark, or injuring ourselves, you know, because we're just exhausted, or we're, you know, all these different things that we do. It's like really like listening,
Hmm.
and like developing that skill of listening. And I think that's essential for everything in life, is like, because it's listening to the body, it's listening to the heart. Like I always talk about this like full alignment. What does that actually mean? It's like, because sometimes your mind says yes, but your like sex center says no, for example, or vice versa. You know, your mind be saying no, your mind might be saying no, but you're still feeling turned on. Like what do you listen to there? You
Mm.
know, like as in, and this is where like really getting clear about like what full alignment feels like in the body, feels like in your like, so you know that's essentially what we want to be looking for, you know. But you know, you can still choose to go for a kind of a like a sort of a yes or a maybe, because you're open to exploring it. But again, like refining our capacity to actually understand what those choices are is really important, you know, in being able to feel safe enough to explore with intimacy, to go into dating and not feel like you're like going to be blown out, you know. Yeah.
Do you think that there's almost like the word that came into my mind was like a scarcity thing,
Mm,
where you get like a hit on one of those. Let's say there's three axes in which you need to
yeah.
fill, right? The
Yeah.
mind, the heart, and then your
The body,
sexuality, the
maybe. Yeah.
body,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe you get two of those three, or maybe you get one of those three.
Yeah.
And there's like this fear that,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'll never find that three of three kind of thing.
Right.
And so then we maybe make an overriding decision to
Yeah.
move forward on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very valid. Like I think a lot of people do that. And the thing is, like, for example, when you have these frameworks that you can work with at the beginning of intimacy, like for example, there's this RBDSM framework, which I'll briefly
Y-
describe,
Yeah.
right? I have a YouTube video actually that goes into it in further detail if anyone wants to check it out. But for example, R is relationship status. So like, are you single? Are you in an open relationship? Are you looking for love? Are you looking for like casual relationship, you know?
Yeah.
B is boundaries. Again, that can relate to kind of like, for example, do I have a boundary around right now I'm celibate, or I'm only open for like kind of like kissing, or I could be, you know, I have a boundary around my time right now, you know, like I only have X amount of time available, whatever it is. Boundaries, again, this can go in many directions. D is desires. So what are your desires? You know, like, do you want to share a kiss and a cuddle? Do you want to dates, you know, do you want to go on some dates? Do you want to go for a walk in the park? Whatever it is, you know, it can really go in many directions. It can also obviously go into deeper sexual desires if you're in that kind of a space with someone, or if you're wanting to explore in that way. Um, RBDSM, S is sexual health. Something that most people never talk about, right? But I
No.
mean, if you're in a situation where you're like, okay, there's some fire between us, there's some flirtation going on, like, you know, it's a really important thing to just talk about your sexual health, you know, like make it normalize it, you know. so that again you can make conscious decisions and choices and like move forward in that way. And then M is like meaning of connection. So again, like what does this mean to you? Does it, for example, the fact that we are having this date or we're like kissing right now, does it mean that, you might feel like, oh, is this going to turn into something more, or is this like a one night thing for you, or like, just clarifying those kind of things. You can also use meaning as kind of an intention, like what's my intention for this?
Hmm.
And then A is aftercare, which is so important in intimacy, especially if you're choosing to explore something like on a deeper level. And I mean, on a deeper level, I don't just mean like having sex, like it can literally just be like we're choosing to like spend this whole day together, and like, that can bring a lot up for people. So like what's the aftercare needed? Like, do I need to check in a few days? Do I need a phone call? Like, how do I like to be communicated with after I've shared intimacy with someone? And like recognizing your own wounds and patterns there so you can communicate them with the other person so that they can either choose to kind of support you and meet you there or not.
Hmm.
And then F is fears, which yeah, so I mean, people use variations of this framework. Like that's a very it's a big one, right? But I have used this like numerous times in the last few years at the kind of very early stages of intimacy. Like as soon as I've noticed that there's some sort of potential connection that's developing. And it has been so life-changing, because again, you get to really clear up any of the fantasies or illusions that you might have. Like, for example, you're like, oh, this might be the man I'm gonna marry. And then they're like, I've just gotten out of a relationship and I'm really only here available for casual things right now. You're clearly going to be able to go, okay, well, that's not what that is, but do I decide to still enter into this
Hmm.
knowing that, or do I decide, no, actually I don't want to do that? It just gives you a lot of information to work with and then be able to like enter more consciously. It's not foolproof, right? But
Yeah.
like essentially it does help a lot. Yeah.
On one hand, I feel like the instrumentation,
Mhm.
the almost metricization
Yeah.
of this, there would just be somebody from like across the room being like, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that this is what intimacy and relationships have
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
to."
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But then there's also another side that I'm thinking about how, well, maybe what you're doing is elucidating
Yeah.
unconscious
Yes.
um, aspects or
Yes.
characteristics that help in, I don't want to use the word self-preservation,
Yeah.
but avoiding
Yeah.
pain or hurt that might not be conducive towards growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, it's like when we talk about boundaries, right? I think it's really, it's like I love the kind of point you're making here. I think at least, like when we talk about boundaries, I mean, boundaries are not the be all and end all, right? But it's like if I say, I have a boundary around, I don't know, like
I need to go to bed at 10.
yeah, 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 for example, right? Like, I mean, essentially, like, that's beautiful because it's allowing you to kind of like look after yourself in the shorter term and whatever. But it might not be the be all and end all of like the reason you have that boundary might be because you really focus on work or like something that you really want to like do. But actually, once you finish that book, that novel you want to write, maybe you're like, actually now I want to extend that boundary. I don't have to have that boundary anymore. So I think boundaries and all of these different frameworks, they're supportive, like in the short term, as we are reparenting ourselves or as we are kind of healing and like working with a lot of this patterning or conditioning that has not been working for us,
Mm.
because again, like you said, we should have, in so many ways, we're like, why haven't we figured this all out yet? But essentially, we are stumbling around, most of us. I would say 90% of people are stumbling around in the relational field making kind of choices that are not necessarily supporting their like I mean again everything's perfect in its own way, but essentially like making unconscious choices
Mm.
because maybe we're being attracted or magnetized to something that's not actually very healthy for us, or that it's going to trigger us further, or it's going to bring up that old trauma wound we have that we haven't dealt with yet.
Yeah.
So what these frameworks and what these kind of tools and skills do is like allow us to kind of like create more safety in our own centers, in our
Mhm.
own fields, and then also in the dynamic of a relational field with anyone we're relating with, and start to become more discerning, more clear, and then you don't need them so much, right? Once you've got that kind of clarity, you're going to just naturally sense
Mhm.
who's more healthy and who's not, and you don't necessarily need to do all this. But it's giving us the kind of stabilizers to be able to take the stabilizers off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost as
Yeah.
if, like, by trial and error,
Yeah.
you might figure some of these things out. But then
Yeah.
if unified, everybody is doing trial and error,
Yeah.
there's a lot of information and knowledge being
Yeah.
lost because it's not being shared.
Yeah.
So if you have this tool or protocol
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
be then discerned through
Yes.
everybody, it can maybe avoid a lot of pain.
Yes. I mean, I wanna talk into that though, because I think if it's not that we're trying to avoid pain, I mean, you can't really avoid essentially.
Pain that's not growth
Yes,
inducing.
yes, exactly, yeah, and but there's something I did wanna bring in there around growth. I think it's really important, and I say this in all of my, like, tantric spaces, and I will say that, like, on my own spiritual journey, I haven't always practiced this, but it's something I'm now practicing, where, a lot of the time I would have thrown myself into the fire of growth. I'm like, "Okay, let's just go and burn it all," like, and just go deep into it, and then you end up I have ended up, like, many times in the past, a little bit frazzled, not really like maybe having had a big powerful experience, but out the other side like a little bit shaken, a little bit vulnerable, a little bit raw. And that's not really what you want to be doing, is like blowing out your nervous system in these transformational spaces. So it's really about finding that growth edge. Like you want to feel that it's edgy. That's going to bring you the growth, right? It's going to like help you transform. It's going to help you alchemize, but it should feel on that kind of like you're dancing on that edge. You're not like jumping in the fire, You can feel the heat and it's like, but it's not burning you,
Mhm.
you know?
And I feel like, especially in the world of like, I don't know if personal development's the right word. There's so
Mm,
many different aspects you can. There's like this. There's this sense, and I think there's a value to it about disciplining yourself to then grow.
yeah.
But I think there's also like this natural coefficient at
Mm,
which you move at,
yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
coming maybe to honor that to some extent, because like you mentioned, throwing yourself into the fire,
Yeah.
it's kind of a way to force yourself
Yes.
to grow. And not to say that you can't do it,
Yes.
you definitely can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's a question about the energy credits sort of
Yeah.
thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
does this make sense? Does
Yeah.
like how many nervous system breakdowns do you have in your life? I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe more
Yeah.
than you think. But at the
Yeah.
same time, is it conducive towards, I guess, a long-term
Yeah.
perspective?
Because I think this is something in the West as well that we have, because I think we're so used to these intense experiences, and actually then going into like an intense weekend or an intense whatever it is, like
Yeah.
medicine journey. Like, I mean, I did a medicine journey maybe 6, 7 years ago where we worked with like 4 different medicines over like 2.5 days. And now I look back at that, I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, I mean, okay, like, but it may not be crazy.
It's
Like,
intense.
it's intense. It's really putting yourself through a lot, on multiple levels. And now I'm seeking, and I think the reason we do that in the West is because we do have so much trauma, and we're used to these intense experiences. So we're actually mirroring our childhood by going into these crazy intense experiences. And while they can be transformative and supportive on multiple levels, essentially, if we're not like if we're continuing to put ourselves through that intensity, then our systems are not getting used to something different, right?
Mm,
Actually, what we want is to be like bringing something that's, yes, growth inducing, like, but also carries a different frequency. It doesn't have to feel so intense. And it's something I've been working a lot on rewiring in my own system, because I've had a very intense life, honestly. So now I'm like, okay, can I choose the more slower, the like softer, the less intense experience? And still I can have growth, but it doesn't have to feel so like catalytic or like, you know?
cleaving. I think there's also a field of exploration which I'm not sophisticated enough in, but the idea that these peak emotional states
Yeah.
are very catalytic of
Yeah.
transformation, right? Like if you look at like I'm just reminded right now of like can't remember what the author was, but it was the author of Endurance,
Mm,
which was this story about this expedition to Antarctica,
mm,
and it was this story about resilience, a story
yeah.
about leadership, and these are the stories of which narratives are built from,
Yeah.
right? That we believe that our character, our virtues are
Yeah.
distilled from.
Yeah.
But then I suppose at the same time, if like our life is constantly this pressure cooker,
Yeah.
like maybe we don't need the pressure cooker. Maybe the pressure cooker can be useful
Yes.
for creating that. Like
Yes.
Jung has this beautiful word, and I cannot remember it, but it was the idea that after a very, let's say, negative experience, there's a period of like a vessel of containment, and it's like the
Mm,
containing of the flames inside. And it's that burning into ash that
yeah.
then allows this metamorphosis.
Yes.
But you have to
Yes.
seal the container and you have to let it go,
Yeah.
which would speak on to the intense point.
Yes.
But then maybe
Yes.
there's other ways where it's like dropping into your body or
Yes.
finding more ease.
Yeah.
Like play is a great example.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somebody said to me, play is the opposite of survival mode,
Yes.
and
Yes.
within that,
Yes.
you can try new things. You can
Exactly.
explore new
Exactly.
things.
Yeah, and that's why I think, like, again, a lot of the tantric spaces that I hold anyway, bringing play and laughter and like humor in is like so important, because it does allow us this kind of, it's a different, um a different perspective to enter into these practices with, you know? It's rather than it being something like serious and heavy, which it can feel like, you know, especially when you're doing something that you've never done or practicing something like rejection, for example, you know,
Yeah.
which brings a lot up for people. Like, you know, it can bring a lot up for people. But if we kind of enter it from this more playful perspective and lens and like, you know, really just like explorative, like childlike innocence, then it completely shifts the way we relate to it, you know?
Hmm. And just to sort of ground when you say the word things like tantric practices,
Yeah.
I mean, some of the ones that I'm familiar with are like, um, caressing, for example, or eye
Eye
gazing,
gazing, yeah.
things like this,
Yeah.
where feel deeply uncomfortable to
Yeah.
start with, but are opportunities to
Yeah.
maybe let go and just
Yeah.
explore because it's a container.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, I think you pretty much summed it up. I mean, I actually call the kind of tantric work that I do modern tantra,
Okay.
which is kind of its own little bubble of like that I've kind of like decided to coin. Because for me, it's very much taking, yes, the tantric ancient some of the ancient tantric practices or tools, but also really bringing this more modern lens into like what we need in this modern day.
Mm.
And for example, I believe that like a lot of communication practices are really necessary and important these days because a lot of the time we just don't know how to communicate, like or we feel afraid to communicate our truth or express our boundaries or whatever. So the kind of way I would like I ground in my work is, yes, always eye gazing, you know, always play and dance and embodiment, usually some inner child like meditations or drop-ins. Um, and there's always like I always introduce like, you know, like I'm trying to think what do I call them again? Like guidelines essentially, or like, you know, for people to kind of make sure that everyone's in like alignment and that we're all kind of on the same page, and that creates a field of safety like straight away. And then, yes, once we've kind of done all of that groundwork and we've kind of like laid those foundations and we've like been able to drop in with like different people through the eyes and we really feel the depth of our souls and we've kind of learned some communication tools, then I bring in more sensuality practices, you know. And that's what kind of allows for us to actually feel safe enough to explore sensuality and sexuality on a deeper level. So it's really, for me, I feel like it's just so important to lay those foundations where we're getting the opportunity to play, to practice, to train essentially. And then you go into that more like charged sensual space and
Mhm.
you're actually a little bit more, I mean, not, of course, there's still going to be people who override their yeses and their nos, but you've got a lot of permission at this point to actually kind of like explore in a way that, you know, you are being empowered, you have been empowered to actually speak up and speak your truth. And you're, you know, I mean, I again would continuously encourage people to speak their truth, to check in with their boundaries, to listen to their bodies, to take pauses, especially when we enter into those deeper essential spaces.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like I just try to think, okay, if you don't have these training
Yeah.
places,
Yeah.
what is the alternative?
Yeah.
And it's you, uh, stumbling around.
Yeah.
Maybe you're going on lots of dates on
Yeah.
Tinder or Hinge or whatever,
Yeah.
and you're learning these things, but you're not having a
Yeah.
vocabulary, so to speak.
Yeah. Exactly.
Of course, obviously, we've talked about a lot of different
Yeah.
things, so it can feel overwhelming. But maybe it's the implementation of one, two, or three things,
Yeah.
and then seeing how does this work? Does this
Yeah.
work for me? Um, and I think also like that again, that I think that inner safety is important as well,
Yeah.
for both sexes, right? Having that sense
Absolutely.
of like uh,
Trust.
trust, self trust,
Yeah.
right?
Trust in ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if I would love to hear what you think
Mm,
about this because I feel as though, especially on all these areas of healing, for
mm.
example, like I always had this thing is everybody is healing, and I'm like, is anybody going to be done healing?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I had this thing for a while where when it came to when it comes to work, for example, you want to be the best that you can be until you can,
Mm,
try to do that. And then it feels like for relationships, you want to be the best that you can be in order before you go into
yeah.
that. But if you have to do all this healing to
Yeah.
get to a place where
Yeah.
you feel semi-functional,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
how do
yeah.
we what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm being reminded of this song called Healing Is Not My Purpose, which I love because again, we can get so caught up into this realm of like, I need to heal everything, like, you know, until I'm healed, I can't do this, you know, like you said, all of that. You know, I think it's like holding the complexity of everything.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, yes, we can be on a healing journey and we are also perfect just as we are.
Mm,
You know, we don't need, actually, essentially, we are all perfect. And really, the purpose of life, I think, is not about like getting to a place. It's about remembering that we're already there. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like I think these can exist alongside each other. And there is a complexity in the human experience, a
Yeah,
very deep complexity.
paradoxes too.
So yes, of course we want to always be like seeking to grow and expand and liberate ourselves. Like I believe that's the purpose of like life in a sense, or like that is the journey of enlightenment, is like to liberate ourselves from the conditions that keep us caged, so that we can actually choose to play the game of life in a very like from a state of like expanded consciousness where we feel completely free, right? We're
Mhm.
not feeling caged or restricted by specific conditions or like the way we grew up or like any of these things. Um so I feel like yes, we can kind of always, it's always good to be leaning into growth, but at the same time remembering that like when we actually just stop and pause and tune in, that everything is actually really great right now, and just to really return to that state of gratitude, and that even if we're feeling uncomfortable feelings,
Mhm.
like, or if we're feeling grief or like anger, like, can we actually find the beauty in that? And I think that again is a huge part of the tantric path, is like, is really learning to have the capacity to hold the complexity of the range of emotions and feelings and sensations that we have as humans. And often we can be feeling grief and joy at the same time, or a multitude of other like sensations and feelings. And actually, there's something really beautiful and profound about that when we actually begin to allow that in, and not getting so attached to a particular state and feeling that that is then like what is dictating our experience in life.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned exactly like the coming to appreciation of the opposite poles of
Yeah.
experience we can be having, and then normalizing that to some
Hmm.
extent and being like, okay, like this is confusing
Yeah.
inside,
Yeah.
but also it's it's good to it can be helpful to have the linearity to try to put things into
Yeah.
perspective. But I always go back to this thing where it's like, um, if a tree is growing, you can't yell at the tree to make it go faster,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Sometimes water to come in a couple
Yeah.
of months and things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
so it 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 just seems yeah, in that way, right, to come back to that self-trust.
Yeah.
And then of course there's from the conflict,
Hmm.
you're going to acquire some scars, let's say,
Yeah.
and it can benefit from that
Yeah.
resolution. But then also having the willingness or courage maybe
Yes. Yes.
to be able to enact in the real world.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Totally. I mean, it is. It's such a courageous journey, and yeah, I think again it's interesting because we were born into this world as babies, and actually, the emotions flow through us just like that, right? I always come back to this. It's like, one minute a baby's crying, the next minute it's laughing, the next minute it's like, like howling, whatever it is. Like essentially that to me that is like enlightenment, like really when we're just allowing these feelings, these emotions, these human experiences to flow through us. So again, it's not about like actually gaining anything more. It's more about like just like lightening the load, like
simplifying.
yeah, simplifying, like coming back to that, like to that state we were in as babies.
It feels like you have to get everything sorted out
Yeah.
before you're able
Yeah.
to finally take the
Yeah.
action to do something.
Yeah.
And then also coming to grace with the fact that, well, you actually have to take the action
Yeah.
to go into the arena,
Yeah, you have to have the courage, yeah.
right? To have that
Lean
courage
into the edge, yeah.
to get maybe hit with an arrow.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Totally.
And then using modalities
Yeah.
to,
And I think that's why we want to also be feeling like we're on this edge of growth. It's going to feel if it feels a bit uncomfortable, it's a good sign.
yeah.
If you're feeling safe all the time and just like kind of like, comfy in your cozy little bubble, like that's not a sign of growth and evolution. And
Hmm.
I think, we can get very stuck in these like safe zones, which I say safe with inverted commas because it's like it's kind of an illusion.
Mm,
So if you're not feeling, again, you want to be playing with and testing what the edge is, and like, can I kind of lean into that edge without again blowing yourself out and putting yourself in a really, it's like, I've had coaches come to me in the past and be like, yeah, sign up for my $20,000 package, right? But I mean, if you're someone who's in debt and doesn't have a job right now, it's not going to be a good idea to sign up for that coach, right? But if you're someone, okay, who it's a bit of a stretch and it's a bit uncomfortable, and you're feeling like it's a yes, then yes, sign up with them. You know what I mean? It's like you've got to find what feels right for you. Like what is the edge that feels like a bit uncomfortable, but it's also going to bring you towards growth and expansion, that's where you want to be living, I think.
Why do you think we want to be at this edge, growing and expanding? If enlightenment, as you mentioned, is reaching towards simplicity of childhood to experience like a blank slate, why do you think we're so intrigued by this? Is it to keep things interesting?
Well, I think again, and I guess I feel like that is still part of our coming back to simplicity, is because a lot of the growth is about simplifying in a sense, or like deconditioning. You
Hmm.
know, a lot of it's not about like again necessarily learning new things, although that can be part of the journey, but it's often about like how do we shed the layers that we've accumulated that are not serving us and are keeping us stuck in fear.
Yeah.
You know,
And maybe there's also a hierarchy of
and it's
things you need to ascend
yeah, and
for.
I think it's a natural. I think that is my experience of God, or the divine, is this like infinity kind of symbol, right? Constantly coming. It's like, did you, in a sense, you could be stemming out from that like single point in the middle, which stems out into duality and comes back to itself.
Hmm.
Or you can like go on this kind of infinite journey, which is constantly coming back to that center point, going out, 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 and back in. And I think this is the journey we're all on as souls.
Amazing. Well, Isha, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? Is there a way that they can connect with you, or a website, or anything like that?
Yeah, I have an Instagram and a website. They're both the same. My name Isha, even though it's the pronunciation is Isha. It's actually spelt in an Irish way, which is Aoise. So my website and my Instagram are both I am Isha, iamisha.com. And yeah, and I have a YouTube channel and various other like newsletter and various other things which I love to share. Some of the downloads I have as I move through my own journey and through my journey with my clients. So yeah, would be delighted to have anyone reach out who's like finding yeah, who's finding this conversation interesting and wants to learn more.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Isha. And thank you to the listener here for tuning in to another episode. And we will catch you next time.